everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Faith in Fine Print with your hosts Nihal Khan and
Omar Nusrat. How's it going, everyone?
Oman Nusrat. We are back after being off for a while. We legit have not met because of COVID and so many other things that have happened in our personal lives in the world. But it's good to be back. Have you been, Oman?
I've been all right. They didn't renew our contracts, so we had to kind of just go independent. That's what happened. I'm just kidding.
Who is they?
There is no they. The mantle.
There
I'm
is
just
a
kidding.
day. DJ Khaled said, "Be afraid, or be careful of they." You know,
That's true.
they are the ones that don't want you to succeed.
There is a they.
There is a day. So, to all of our listeners, thank you so much for your support. We didn't even start this podcast a year ago, and we've already released about 8 episodes. We have had the chance to be involved with a lot of cool speakers that were doing amazing work and have them on our show. We've hit about 1,300 listens altogether from everyone. But it's been challenging, right, with COVID and people being pushed into a space where they're getting sick or their mental health's being affected, or God forbid, they're dying or losing their jobs. And I think a lot of the world is adjusting, right? And we're learning, we're constantly growing. And how do we actually go about to continue that learning process so that we can continue to stay up to date, number one, with how the world is functioning? And then number two, how do we continuously learn? So our guest today is someone who I really respect, mainly because in a world that is very inconsistent, he's probably one of the most consistent people that I've seen. Our guest today is Omar Usman. He's professionally a technology consultant. And he's also a certified project manager, and he's also a certified John Maxwell certified leadership trainer and speaker. So for those of you that have done any reading in like leadership books, John Maxwell is almost always the way to go. He's a very, very productive, professional, and successful leadership coach. And one of the quotes that I think sticks out the most about Maxwell was when he said that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So check out John Maxwell's works. Omar has also held many leadership roles within a bunch of different national organizations. He's a founding member of MuslimMatters.org, a very well-read blog pertaining to issues regarding Muslims throughout the world, as well as Qalam Institute in the Dallas area. He's a regular khatib in the Dallas area, and he's delivered presentations at national conventions and Islamic centers across the United States and Canada. And today we're going to be talking to Omar about a variety of different subjects, which we'll get into in a moment. So Omar, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Faith in Fine Print. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Alhamdulillah, how are you?
I'm good. Hanging in there. Let's jump right into it, man.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, I've known you probably since 2008, right? And that's almost 12, 13 years. And you're a father, you're married, you have a job, and yet you have stayed active in whatever capacity that you were able to stay active in your community, right? People may see your work online and they may think that a lot of what you've done or accomplished within the community through what you've produced is something that you just did in an online arena, but you're a regular khatib. You regularly work with the community. You helped found Qalam Institute. When there wasn't a seminary, when there weren't Umrah packages, when there weren't traveling seminars. And in retrospect to all of that, there's a lot of continuous learning that you've engaged in. And I wanted to kind of talk to you about that. Like, tell us about yourself. What piqued your interest? What piqued your interest to help community and to build products and services that would help the Muslim community? So the floor is yours.
Sure. So I think starting at that point of community work, I grew up seeing community work all the time. So my dad was always Masjid board member, president, secretary, treasurer, you name it, he did it. So from an early age, I've seen that as kind of the model of, he works, he spends time with the family, and then he's got something going for the community as well. So that model is sort of ingrained in my head from an early age. I think for myself, it just took a little bit of time to figure out, well, how can I make what I consider to be a meaningful contribution. And I think alhamdulillah, along the way, it was mostly being blessed with just some good opportunities and being able to know some of the right people at the right times is, that's not in your control, but alhamdulillah, it worked out that way. So for example, Sheikh Abdul Nasser was my local imam since the late 90s. We were praying Tarawih behind him while he was still studying in Pakistan. So that's way before Qalam or conventions or any of that stuff. He was just Imam Nasser, our local masjid guy. Like that was that. So, so having known some of those, people like that from early on is definitely helpful.
Yeah. And during that time period when you were there in Dallas and with Sheikh Abdul Nasser, when it came to, obviously you're from the Dallas community. It's one of the largest, or one of the larger Muslim communities right now in the United States. What did the scene look like back then? Were there a lot of organizations as there are now? And like, what did the groundwork look like for the work that you're doing now?
So Dallas didn't have a whole lot going on for a long time. If rewind back to, so you said 2008, I think that's like a good time marker for Dallas. So at about that time, there wasn't a lot going on. Actually, I was living in Atlanta and I was moving back to Dallas, and I didn't want to move back to Dallas because I felt like there wasn't anything in the Muslim community there. So I either wanted to stay in Atlanta, or I was even looking at places like Houston or somewhere else. My family was here, so that was the main driver. But aside from that, there wasn't really much going on. At that time, I remember it must have been 2005, I think. Like Al-Maghrib started in Dallas, but not enough people were interested, so it fizzled out because that culture of learning or taking classes just wasn't there. Like even in college, I remember we didn't have like a real MSA. I didn't have a real MSA experience. So a lot of those things just weren't here. They weren't active. And the masjid scene is nowhere like you see now. The masjids that people see now is like the big mega masjids. Irving Masjid that's like the most famous one, but at that time it was still like a shopping center, or had just gotten built, and so those things kind of grew from their infancy. A couple of imams came in, took over, and then it slowly started to build from there. But for quite a while, there wasn't really much going on. I think that's one of the reasons that Qalam was able to take off, because Qalam initially was a local masjid program. It was, quite literally just Saturday seminars for the local community. And one of the reasons that it took off quickly was because there wasn't anything else like that going on at the time.
Do you think the thing that allowed it to grow, like what was the need in the community? You mentioned that people weren't prepared for the whole sitting down and learning regularly and taking classes and all that. And I'm wondering, because in Connecticut we have, and parts of Connecticut we have the same thing, right? Where people may not be ready for a weekly thing or a bi-weekly thing, but they're ready for like a monthly thing, right? So where do you start? And was the need there a sense of community? Was it a sense of a place to seek knowledge from verified sources? What was the need at that time?
I would say it was like a little bit of all of those, so to speak, right? So if you can rewind that long, there was really no such thing as like a masjid program. There were some family nights with an MS Word flyer with typos and a bad dinner. There was your weekly halakha that like 4 uncles attended and all pontificated about the Quran on their own. And like, that was about it. There wasn't really, a culture of doing programs at other masjids, or even going to a masjid that wasn't your local masjid. There was for most people, there was no reason to ever go attend Jummah somewhere else just because of who the khatib was. It was, this is our masjid, this is where we go, this is what we do. Whatever they have to offer, great. Whatever they don't, they don't. And so at that time, seeing, things like Al-Maghrib, for example, was very new and innovative, to have marketing for a class or to modernize the learning format. I think we take that for granted now, but at that time, I think that was a major shift in mentality to say, hey, we're going to teach you Islam, but we're not going to just sit in the corner of the masjid on the floor. We're going to actually do it like an actual classroom, the way that you're accustomed to learning in a university. And so that was different enough that people were like, oh, wow, we can learn about Islam in a quote unquote modern format.
Do you
So
think that,
when we did seminars, it was accounting for those things, right? So it was accounting for the marketing and packaging.
Mhm.
It was accounting for the format, because we're also looking at, well, okay, who's, if only the old uncles are showing up, well, who's serving like the families or the people with young kids? They're not coming, not because they don't want to, but it's hard. If you got a 4-year-old at home, you're not coming to a masjid class twice a week.
Mhm.
It's impossible. And so we went to like a monthly format, and with a monthly format made accommodations like, well, okay, if we're going to do a monthly class, let's have babysitting. Let's make sure that we serve lunch. Like, let's make sure that we try to accommodate people so they can come and they can actually learn. And then the other thing, and the last point I'll make here, is on the knowledge front, was we wanted to push the imams to showcase what they could do. Like, okay, you went and you studied Islam for 10 years or 12 years. You know a whole bunch of stuff that's way beyond what you showcase in Sunday school to the 12-year-olds, right? You have a lot more to offer than just reading a hadith after Isha every night, right? So do this class, but this was a point of contention almost. I had to push them. I was like, look, when you're researching tafsir, don't you find these cool little gems that you share with your other imam buddies? They're like, oh yeah, all the time. And I'm like, do you teach them in class? They're like, no, because people don't understand it. And I was like, well, take that stuff and teach it. And I go, even if it goes over their heads, at least it'll be new enough and interesting enough that they'll know that there's a lot more to it than what they've been accustomed to.
That's really interesting. Do you think that when you changed the format of those classes and you made it, like you said, less of like, let's sit in the corner and go over things, but now it's almost like a seminar or a college seminar, changing the format to fit their notion of what a serious educational environment looks like. When you did that, do you think their understanding of seeking knowledge changed? Do you feel that they started to take it more seriously?
I think so, because I think the environment affects your expectations.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like when you go to a fast food restaurant versus a fine dining restaurant, or if you're doing like a dawah table at a college, right? We ran into this issue at my college. Do you have like these, really low quality mass produced Quran translations that are falling apart with like a cheap discolored cover?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you have something that's actually packaged in a nice and appealing way? And I understand that there's always a cynical side of like, well, it shouldn't matter. The message is all that matters. But no, like the environment makes a huge difference. The appearance makes a huge difference. And so I think when people see that the organizers of the event and the teachers of the event have put an extra level of seriousness in their preparation beyond normal, I think it sets the expectation for the student as well that they come and match that level also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and not only that, I think what you mentioned, Omar, that's a very, very, very astute point to really ponder about, that our environment, right, and how our environment affects us. And I think right now more than ever, people are realizing how their environment or lack thereof is actually affecting their ability to be healthy and performative within society. And it's people are cooped up at home around people that they're not used to being around as often as they are around them as often, and that is causing issues. But to kind of move forward on that point, once upon a time, the weekend courses or the double weekend seminars or the single weekend seminars or the day-long intensives, and you can kind of comment on this, but I find personally that as I get older, as I mentioned, you have a family. I work with an Islamic center. It's tougher and tougher sometimes to really give physically 8 hours of your Saturday and Sunday to being in a classroom in an intensive manner, wherein you may learn information, but at the same time, the way we learn changes as we grow, right? The way you learned when you were 5, like for example, the way you're going to teach your child as they're a 5-year-old, or the way you're taught as a 5-year-old is not the same as a 10-year-old, as a 15-year-old, as a 20-year-old. And one thing which I think that the learning process for the Muslim community, the pedagogical model, right, in pedagogy and the study of teaching, the thing that we're suffering, I feel like, is we've had like 15, almost 20 years of this form of teaching. But as young families are starting to settle, they're realizing that it's not actually the most conducive way to learn. So you see people now having, especially with COVID, one thing that has occurred is that everyone is forced to engage with their communities in an online format. Like, why would I show up to a place if I can get this X, Y, and Z thing through the internet for my family and whatnot? But I guess moving forward, the evolution of learning in the Muslim community, do you like what are we what do we need to do to be productive again in this post-COVID era, or in the COVID and the post-COVID era?
So I feel that this is one area where our community is perpetually behind. We don't keep up with learning trends. We don't evolve and adjust fast enough, right? So when the weekend seminar came out, it was awesome, and everyone was like, "We'll make all the sacrifices in the world to attend." Okay, cool, that's awesome, but after a while, it becomes ubiquitous. Everyone's got a weekend seminar now, right? Everyone's got that program going on. So now, what are you going to do differently? Someone comes up with an idea like, let's do something online this way. Oh, that works. Everyone just goes and copies it, whether it's actually working or effective or not. I think what needs to be done with the learning is it almost has to be re-engineered from the ground up, in a sense, that what are the learning outcomes? What are the goals that we need to achieve? Who is it targeted for? We still have way too much of a one size fits all mentality. We do the weekend seminar and everyone come, whether you're 15, whether you're 25, whether you're 75, whether you're married or single or whatever. You know, we ignore all demographics, we ignore all markers, and we just say everyone show up. Before we got on the call, we were talking about ICI, and I remember when you were here in Dallas, we did there was a program that one of your colleagues organized at the masjid for how to get through like a job interview and pick a career, something along those lines. So the program was geared around like career advice, picking a major, getting your foot in the door in the corporate ring, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. After Maghrib prayer, the board member gets on the mic and makes an announcement. We have a youth program. All the 8 to 12-year-olds come sit in the front. And I was like, dude, no. He goes, isn't this a youth program for teenagers? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, and how are 8-year-olds teenagers? He's like, but it's for the youth. And I'm like, no, this is not going to be useful for them. But they can't see that. They see everyone as the same. And so we have to go back and like literally re-engineer.
All lives matter move.
Oh no.
It's like youth. There's all youth. All lives matter.
They're all youth.
Yeah.
So I think we have to go back and really re-look at what are we teaching, what's the purpose, what's the intended outcome, and then how best can it be delivered? Because there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. To your point, someone in college or someone whose kids are older, for them to block out a weekend, hey, that actually might be fun. They might want to do that, right? Someone that's got a couple of kids at home that are younger, blocking out a whole weekend is the equivalent of like moving mountains.
Yeah.
It's going to be impossible, you know? So we have to really re-look at figuring out different ways to target different people. And we can't just treat it as a monolith anymore. We need to have targeted activities for all different types of groups and in all different types of formats.
And I think also one thing that a lot of our communities fell into the trap of is that there were many organizations doing that, right? And I think we have learned, but I think one of the mistakes that happened is exactly what you said, is that you may have speaker X of organization Y. And again, I'm not signaling out any specific organization. Me and you during that time will know of at least 3 or 4 organizations that were doing that, right? But like they'd go in and they'd give a one size fits all explanation to everyone's problems. And when the shoe's not fitting, when you're trying to take like a square or a cylinder shape and shove it into the triangle thing, you're going to break the box, you're going to get agitated, and you're going to break the piece. And I feel like for so many years, a lot of folks kind of dropped off the bandwagon or had their own faith crisis issues or their own like self fulfillment issues. wherein the actual nature of the problem that they were facing was not being addressed at an individualized, specific level, number one. And then number two, to Alman's point, which you mentioned as well, Omar, was that how you package something matters, right? But at the same time, to go into an extreme where we're spending a lot of time on just the packaging as opposed to the content and the concept is equally detrimental, if not more than not packaging your thing at all. And I find it freaking hilarious, right? Because we didn't have like this social media Islam thing that like exists now, or people have a controversy like every week in the Muslim community on the internet, or someone just speaks like an utter jerk and expects you to come to the truth or like accept Islam, right? Like with due respect, I find most online dawah efforts hilarious and ridiculous because there's nothing prophetic about the way they're calling to people. They're calling them out, they're calling them names, they're publicly shaming them, and they expect that like that's going to actually attract people. But there's a point that I had put up recently. If your spirituality is causing you to see people as less or to become belligerent towards those close to you, you're not actually learning spirituality. You're learning ideologue and nonsense, which your heart and mind are taking in, which is actually in the form of a sheepskin, right? Like it's hidden. It's not real. That's not real spirituality. But I guess, not to go off on like a tangent, but how do we actually now approach this? Like, I feel personally, I was actually talking to someone about this. I don't feel comfortable putting my own thoughts and ideas and work that I'm writing even, or posts to share with the public anymore, because I don't like the reaction I've gotten before. And it is very like hurtful. And, what would you advise what would you advise in that area?
I mean, that's like a lot of topics that you covered in one. I think, and this will probably get me in trouble too, I think the vast majority of what people consider online dawah is really more of an exercise of ego and self-delusion more than it is dawah.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. That's Faith and Kindness. That's a good point.
But it's exactly what you described. It's self-serving. It's made to build yourself up by tearing others down. And it has nothing to do with communicating any type of a positive message. There's nothing remotely prophetic about it. It's clear as day. Mm-hmm. But I think people keep falling for it, kind of like, tabloids or Howard Stern or something like that, where it's just you keep wanting to see the next train wreck. And so people are watching it and consuming it. It gets traffic. And because there's an Islam label on it, it gets categorized in this dawah category, even though there's nothing educational or uplifting about it, by any stretch of the imagination. I think in terms of, what you said about like sharing your own thoughts and so on, that's where it's tough. And I don't have an easy answer. I personally also usually err on the side of not sharing things. Yeah. I would say anytime I'm thinking about posting something, if I stop and pause, 9 times out of 10, I don't put it up. Right. If there's a lot of times where I'll post something, I'll look at it and I'll just be like, nah, and then I just go back and delete it right away.
I've typed like absolute, like complete paragraphs.
Yeah.
Being like, no, I'm just not going to post this.
Yeah.
Just like,
dude, it's like if you say on the internet, I mean, not on on social media, right? Like, I like brownies. It's like, why do you hate cupcakes? Yeah. Why are you a fascist against cookies? Like, literally, like the reactions you'll get.
Before we jump into like the social media thing, I think, I wanted to comment earlier. We were talking about the one size fits all class approach and, changing the structure of those things. I noticed that one of the obstacles in doing that, that I've witnessed in the masajid and, different institutions is that, you would come out and say, oh, this is a class for this group. Right. And then there's like certain people in the community who will be insecure, right, and be like, well, why can't we attend? Or what are you teaching them that you can't teach us? Or like, there's this thing of like, maybe not even trusting the teachers or not trusting the process of addressing different people and talking to people where they are. and this idea of insecurity and how things, you know, flow, I think that just carries over into social media, right? Like it's social media is a place where insecurity thrives, and it comes out in the worst ways. And so when you add into that formula, uh, dawa, or like, you know, trying to talk to people about religion, it turns into a very crazy situation. Because once again, you know, social media, it's not like we have, if someone posts, if Nihal posts a video, it's going out to the 70-year-old uncle who has a Facebook, but also the 14-year-old kid who has a Facebook. So it's going to everyone anyway. And then you have all of that, those insecurities, you know, not, it's not being filtered or anything like that. It's just people commenting, and then that's where I think the toxicity kind of comes from. But going off of this idea of insecurity and social media, Nihal, I think you had mentioned that Omar had written, I think it was a book on the fiqh of social media. So I kind of wanted to dive into that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it's about really all these topics that we're talking about. But Hamla Fiqh of Social Media started that about 5 years ago. You know, just writing about the topic, and then that turned into people saying, "Oh, can you give a presentation on this at the masjid?" And it kind of snowballed from there. And then the book Hamla is a culmination of those community visits, all those conversations, you know, having with people after presenting, and then also just kind of repackaging a little bit of that writing and updating it, but really covering a lot of these topics. You know, like you just mentioned, insecurity. That's a huge part of what happens on social media, not just from you know what you mentioned, but also like what you consume can make you feel insecure. Something that you post might make someone else feel insecure, and then that manifests itself in different ways. The way envy starts up and gets magnified by those things, online dawah and those ramifications. So the book is intended to be, as much as I could, be timeless in the sense that it's platform agnostic. It's not specific to Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or anything like that, but more what are essentially the basic Sunday school level Islamic principles that we need to apply in the digital age.
How many times did you teach your Fiqh of Social Media seminar before the book actually went up? Because I know you were teaching for years.
I want to say close to 50.
Okay.
But it was at least one a month for a while. So on average, yeah.
That's cool.
I thought Nihal's question was, how many years have you been teaching it? And he was like, at least 50. I was like, wait, how old are you?
Know how many times. But with that, let me jump to another topic, Omar. Continuous learning. Like that's the one thing which I seriously respect you a lot for. You know, you've been consistently involved in just getting up there. I remember one of the first people to introduce me to Malcolm Gladwell was you. One of the first people to introduce me to a lot of different leadership books was yourself. And I know, like at that time, you were, I think, a management consultant for some years, and I'm sure it helped you in your career a lot. And you tried your best to apply that into the nonprofit sector within the Muslim community, which, alhamdulillah, was a very successful feature, in my opinion, in the way that you traveled the country and provided a lot of communities advice to grow. One of the ways which you did that, I remember, was the website muslimsi.com, which I think now has been completely transferred over to your Ibn Abi Umar website. But about like, so there's two questions. Number one, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the habit of continuous learning, and how you went from learning for like corporate productivity into personal growth, and how you kind of, you know, went from one side to the other, or, you know, how you kind of play with both areas. And then number two, about your work with like Muslim SI and Productive Muslim to have better communities overall.
So, I mean, in terms of learning, I think that's just always been a part of my nature. Like I've always been an avid reader, even since I was a kid. And so, you know, when you get that MSA bug of learning about Islam, you dive in and start reading everything and learning everything that you can. And then, you know, same thing in the professional side, you have to learn things to survive or grow in your career. I think for me, there was an inflection point at somewhere along the way of like, oh, these things aren't mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. You know, there's an intersection, and one helps the other quite a bit. I think, you know, and to give credit where credit is due, I think Muhammad al-Sharif was one of the first people that really pushed that concept of hey, there's a bunch of things out there in the world that we need to learn from. You know, it's not just that we learn from the Muslims and that's like kuffar, secular stuff. He was just like, no, like there's a bunch of useful stuff that we need to learn and implement. And I think one of his really early lectures was something like the teaching methods of the Prophet ﷺ, where he took, you know, like learning methods and showed us from the Sunnah how they were applied, right? So that's one of those things that stuck, like, oh, there is definitely some type of an overlap, right? And in learning these things. And then I think with leadership in particular, I'll share two things that for me really cemented these ideas in my head. So one was, as you know, same thing, as I'm diving in, like learning all these things, like, oh wow, there's all this good material, everyone needs to know it. But then you're also thinking like, well, okay, well, how did people learn this stuff before? How did Muslim scholars know about any of these things? Or, you know, how do they, if I see, you know, a sheikh implementing like very good leadership characteristics, for example, I'm like, well, he didn't attend like a John Maxwell class or something like that. Where did he get it from? And so that curiosity point led me to understand that really it wasn't that they studied leadership, it was that they studied Sirah properly, right? Like they studied the Sirah with a teacher that taught them what prophetic adab looks like. And when someone is actually following prophetic adab, almost by default, they will exhibit amazing leadership characteristics. They know how to treat people well. They know how to connect with people. They know how to be compassionate and respectful and empathetic and all those things, because it comes from the Sunnah.
Mm.
And the other thing for me was when I went to the John Maxwell training, the one that was in person. So it's like a yearly event, and if you can imagine, it's like 4,000 or 5,000 people all congregated into like a huge, gigantic hotel ballroom, like you take over the hotel type of thing. And
Pre-COVID, everyone, pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID, yes, definitely pre-COVID. But you know, I was taking it because someone had recommended it to me. I didn't have a particular goal going into it, really beyond personal enrichment and just kind of a TBD. I know this stuff is good. I just don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. Right. That was my, like, I'll figure it out. When I got there, yes, there was definitely a lot of people who were in it to build their own personal business or their own side hustle. A lot of them were very well, because it's like an evangelical community. So the John Maxwell folks were very well integrated with the Chick-fil-A people. So a lot of them had leadership training contracts with Chick-fil-A franchise owners.
Wow.
So they were coming to get John Maxwell training so they could go back and start training like Chick-fil-A managers, basically, right? That's one group. But another group of people that I met there were people that were already successful professionals. They already had their own, you know, they were already earning their living and everything. And they were like, I'm here to learn how to be a better volunteer at my church. That was their only intention in attending this event and going through the John Maxwell process and all that, was I want to learn the things that will make me a better volunteer at the church. And for me, I was just like, oh my God, we're so behind.
It's like, wait, you want to serve your church and not make a buck off of it? Like, you want to learn to be a good volunteer?
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, that's crazy. Can you also talk to us a little bit about Muslim SI and Qalam and, you know, and how you got into those specific projects? And like, I actually really missed the Muslim SI stuff. I used to enjoy it. Like, I hate email listservs, and like, but I enjoyed getting like a Muslim SI like email. That's how much I like Muslim SI.
So Muslim SI was my good friend Imran Haq and myself. Because, you know, we're always at that time we were both active with like Masjid stuff and all of that. And we're just like, man, no one's talking about how to do this stuff better. Everyone in the world is having all these same conversations about how terrible everything's going, but no one's actually saying like, here's something that you can implement that'll do it better. And so the blog started with that intention of let's see if we can just put stuff out that gains traction. And alhamdulillah, it did. Like, we got really good feedback in the sense of board members emailing saying that they, you know, maybe had an article. One of the articles is like an agenda item at their next board meeting. You know, I did an interview with Sheikh Abdul Nasser on how to hire an imam for your masjid, like realistically. You know, like not the whole Superman speaks 4 languages and can connect with the youth and do marital counseling and all, you know, 100 other things. But what does it realistically look like?
With a hand in its plate and can jump through a hula hoop of fire while speaking Urdu in a Hyderabadi accent.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, a lot of places I've actually, and it's literally like, can, you know, has he memorized the Quran, and does he recite nicely? And that's literally it. Like, has he done a Jummah khutbah? Nice, cool.
Yeah, it's like two extremes.
Yeah.
It was just surprised me, because I remember, you know, what was it? There was a situation in which someone was not even qualified really to be in that position. They were an engineering student that just moved to America and needed a place to live. And they're like, okay, since you don't have any money, just be the imam of the masjid, and, you know, we'll just give you a place to stay. And it's amazing how, you know, we can go to literally any other profession and we seek qualifications for that person, but for the person who's dealing with our hearts and our spirituality, we kind of just, yeah, like literally anyone will do.
Ad hoc it.
Yeah.
You know, I remember, I remember, I forgot which masjid it was, which doesn't matter. I'm not going to say it publicly, but there was a masjid that had hired an imam from Al-Azhar, right? And for those of you that are not familiar with Al-Azhar University, is one of the oldest Islamic universities in the world. But they don't just teach Islam, they teach other subjects as well. So they had an imam that graduated from there, but guess what his degree was in English. And they hired him.
Wow.
But you know, it's just interesting because during that time period, I feel like, Omar, that you were writing, it's like the community was either falling into that extreme of just hiring anyone who's a Joe Schmo who can't even say the basics of Quran, while at the other end you had like, you know, an expectation for someone to be Superman. But you know, it's interesting. I actually had a discussion with someone. She was one of my classmates, and she writes about the intersection of Islamic law and digital media. So talking about how issues that come up in the Muslim community, we need to talk about, to some degree, seeing what authority looks like in a modern world, right? Because with digital platforms, anyone and everyone can have authority. Anyone who has a mic and a camera can have authority and say the most ridiculous things, right? Until you're Donald Trump and you get suspended from Twitter. But it's ridiculous. And I felt like that you were speaking to that space before it was like it was hip to speak to that space.
I think it's just a matter of having noticed those behaviors popping up, right? Like, I think that's one of, you know, alhamdulillah, being able to be at the beginning of something like Muslim Matters and some of these other projects was we got to see the development of this stuff early on. You know, before really, I mean, we got to see the advent of the online Islamic community before social media just poured gasoline all over it.
Wow,
and
what
so,
a metaphor.
You know, and so those behaviors were always there. It was just now it's just a lot more amplified.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Hopefully we can grow and, you know, see what solutions are up next. With that, we're going to take a short break. Hear a word from our sponsor, The Mantle, and we'll finish up our podcast with our guest, Omar Usman. Stay tuned, everyone.
Hey listeners, wondering what The Mantle is? The Mantle is an organization based in Fairfield County, Connecticut. We are dedicated to creating sacred spaces that facilitate the understanding of Islamic spirituality. The Mantle aims to revive the prophetic tradition of understanding, compassion, and spiritual cultivation. We encourage authenticity in exchange for authenticity. Come as you are to learn Islam as it is. Find out more about The Mantle by following us online on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Mantle of Love. We hope you enjoy the rest of this episode of Faith in Fine Print.
Okay, we are back. Oops, I want to play that again. That was a message from The Mantle, our sponsor. And for those of you that are not familiar with it, check them out, Mantle of Love on Facebook. They're a organization based in Connecticut. Alman is a part of it and one of the founders. And they're doing good work in bringing programming and awareness about community development within the Connecticut community. But let's get back into it, Omar, and then we're basically have a little bit more to go. But Omar, right now, what are you working on? What are some of the projects that you've been active with and things that you've been passionate about? Things that you may have started to work on after quarantine kind of took hold, but like what's going on in your life right now? You're muted, Omar.
So most of quarantine for me really ended up being getting the Fiqh of Social Media book done.
Yeah.
That was something I'd wanted to do for a very long like it was a running joke with my friends, like, when are you ever going to get this book done? But alhamdulillah, finished that up. And then now it's really, I want to write another book, if I'm being just completely transparent. Like that's what I want to do next. And it will most likely be along the lines of that Muslim SI/leadership stuff. I think there's something there. I haven't quite fleshed it out yet, but that's where I'm shifting focus to next, inshallah. But aside from that, really, it's with Productive Muslim, we've they've got the Baraka Academy program, so it's focused on faith-based professional development, and I'm leading the book club there. So in the book club, we're doing a mix of it's meant to be a mix of both secular and Islamic books. So taking a subject, but going into it a little bit deeper. So for example, we might read a John Maxwell book on leadership, but then also read like the John Adair book on prophetic leadership. We might read a book on, 1 month we did Atomic Habits, which is a pretty standard, habit building book. But then we also did In the Early Hours by Khurram Murad. Yeah. So, trying to find complementary works like that are focused on self-improvement, but giving it a heavy dose of the Islamic side of it as well.
Yeah, it's hitting that. I think the proper word is gravitas, where you're leading people into a space where they can have a practical application of everything that they're learning, but also not getting lost in the jargon and in the theoretical nature of a lot of what is taught. And I think that goes into another aspect, like a way that we lose people is when one thing I like to say is that the beauty of our faith is that teaching was one of the first things that was taught to us, right? Like Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. The first revelation was read or recite in the name of your Lord, right? And reading at the end of the day requires you to read something that's written, but for the Prophet's sake, it was repeat what is being said to you, right? It's a form of auditory learning and vocal learning that is being utilized to teach mankind a message. But it had to be comprehensive. It had to be something that was coherent. And I feel like the biggest challenge that I think there was a book on this, but I'm forgetting. But the biggest challenge that we are facing is in educating others is grabbing their attention, number one, sure. But number two, we're fighting in a world where there's a lot of information, but very little knowledge. Right?
Absolutely.
I think that's what it comes down to, is like that gravitas between learning what wisdom is. How do you actually put that information into action? But I feel like, again, like we're mentioning a lot of issues, but solution wise, we mentioned that, we do not evolve fast enough, or, we're too much of a one size fits all community. What are practical ways that we can go about kind of removing that? And I'll give you an example from like because you're familiar with me, right? It's like I was kind of into that whole like weekend learning and, being around the most known sheikh or something like that. But I realized that that's not working for communities. That's why I kind of got into chaplaincy, so you can understand people's own issues at an individual level. But it's easy to do that within a small community, but how can we actually understand that idea of providing individualized care and teaching for people and kind of scale it in size from there?
That's a tough question. Like that's, I think, the challenge that really is facing our community now. And it's, it's a mix of a lot of things. I think one aspect of it is, as like you mentioned, scaling, right? Which is, that's always the natural inclination. Like, how can we scale this to as many people as possible? And I think one part of like the information overload and all those things is that everyone's trying to scale everything very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost feel, and again, this might be like an unpopular take, but I almost feel that we have to do the opposite, and that start doing more of the things that don't scale. And by that, I mean, you know, as we see, for example, all the stuff taking off online and all these things happening in the online arena, we need to go back and double down on having a good experience at the masjid. You know, doing a kids program or doing, you know, I know the family night program is super cliche, but people, I think there's a large demographic of people that not only would appreciate, but benefit more from just, you know, look, my oldest is 15 or about to turn 15, right? He's not going online looking for Mufti Menk videos or like the, you know, this Tafsir series on Surah Al-Hujurat that's like 20 hours long. Like, he doesn't care about any of that. And I can't force any of that on him. But if there was just a decent program at the masjid where there was like a good imam that gave like a good lesson that was enriching, that there were just some other kids there that he was, you know, was friends with, that for me does more for the iman and Muslim identity almost than like trying to stick it in front of YouTube and watching so-and-so sheikh for a few hours, right? And so, yes, there's scaling, but I think we have to really start looking back at what does our local community look like. And I'll take it even a step further, which is and again, this is very anecdotal. This is extremely anecdotal. But I don't see even the mega masjid model that our communities are going to as working. And what I'm seeing as successful now, and again, very anecdotal, is the mega masjid is being used for Jummah prayer, interfaith activities, or, you know, just to get together. But the community building now is happening more even outside the masjid. And I'll give you our own example. Like the last couple of Ramadans, the most fulfilling thing that we've done in Ramadan is have a small group of families and just rotate around each other's houses.
Yeah.
And that building of community was taking place outside the masjid, but that was almost much more impactful than, and I'm not trying to diss the masjid here, so I hope no one reads that into it, but that had a great impact, much more than some of the events happening at the masjid, you know? So I think there needs to be just a refocus on what actually matters and what's meaningful. Because yeah, you can scale, like we can put out the Fiqh of Tahar and scale it out to 1 million people, but like, what is it ultimately going to accomplish? Who's actually going to get it? How are they going to act upon it? And so the community building really has to go back to those smaller scale things. That's one. The other, and I'm sorry, what was the other thing that you mentioned?
The other thing I'd basically mentioned was in I guess moving forward in our community. I mean, I think the scaling point, you made a good point, but I think what it also comes down to.
Well, let me say this about scaling though, right? So that was my case against scaling. In my case for scaling upward, I would say that it needs a little bit more intentionality. Right now, there's a tendency for a lot of organizations to just throw things up because we can. So I get up and let's say the masjid, just whatever happens at the masjid automatically gets posted to YouTube, automatically gets podcasted out, automatically goes on Facebook Live. All these things just happen. And that's overwhelming, because even if I'm only following my own local masjid, I'm not following any other local speaker, right? I'm getting like 2 or 3 classes a week. I'm getting like the Friday khutbah. I'm getting this other thing. I can't even keep up with my own masjid in that case, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that even the content that we put online needs more intentionality or actually more curation. That's maybe what's needed. Is we're not just throwing everything up for the sake of it, because right now there's this mentality of, oh, if we put it online, we get the reward of everyone that listens to it. So if 1 million people listen to it, I'm going to get 1 million rewards. Like, well, no. Not everything is going to go viral. The vast majority of what you put online is going to get like 10 hits at most, right? So let's be realistic about it. Instead of flooding everyone with a bunch of stuff, let's be a little bit more selective about what we put out and why, and then also communicate the value of that so that the people who are looking for it can find it.
Right.
Yeah. And I think also, like you mentioned, this fixation on transactional piety, as you mentioned, like if I do X, then I get rewarded with Y.
Yeah.
Like even in like all these hadith and stuff, like I get 72 this or I get 100 that. Like it's actually not a quantitative amount, it's a qualitative amount, because in, you know, a lot of people forget that in Islam, like a lot of the numbers that may be mentioned, unless they're very, very, very specific, are actually in reference to something which is qualitative more so than quantitative. So I think this fixation on transactional piety is something that we need to be aware of, that you want to do something that's holistically benefiting people so that, yes, inshallah, in the akhirah, you will be rewarded for it. The second thing I wanted to ask, curation versus production. Where does the line lie there? And I think while you were talking, Omar, I was examining my my own bias, and a very close friend of mine mentioned this to me. They said that that we, as living in a capitalist society, we have put our self-worth, we have equivocated our self-worth with how much we produce, right? And especially in a COVID world, production and the idea of production kind of goes out the window because you can't be present. You know, the measurables are very different. So I think a lot of people may be going through mental health issues because of the fact that their self-worth is being attacked, or they feel that they're not fulfilling their self-worth because they've attached it to how much production value they hold. But what's the difference between curation and production?
The algorithms of like social media, it's like if you're not posting all the time, you're just not going to be seen. And
yeah,
so
that's
now
true.
There's another stress of like, we need to put everything we're doing at the masjid, everything we're doing out there. Once again, going back to what Omar said, not really paying attention to how it's curated, the intention behind it. Just let's do it for the sake of doing it. And it's not really resulting in anything, but please continue now.
Yeah, but Alman, that's a really good point, right? You can get involved with something like content creation with a good intent, but as soon as you do this, the pressure mounts.
Right.
Of like having to keep up with it. You know, even now people tell me all the time, like, your podcast isn't consistent enough. This is not consistent enough.
We're smiling.
Until I wrote this book and everyone like kind of got on my case, my Instagram profile was private. Like you couldn't reshare, do nothing on my Instagram. Only now, because I'm trying to promote the book, that I make it public. But I immediately noticed the same thing, because now like Instagram is pressuring me, like, you need to post one more photo. You need to, you know, have this scheduled to get viewed by people, etc. So the pressure mounts as soon as you start creating content. But like, Nihal, the line between, you know, like production, contentment, etc., like that's tough. And when you were mentioning that, the thing that I thought of was something that Sheikh Abdul Nasser always tells us in Khatib workshop, which is that when someone gives a khutbah, like, the microphone is self-delusional. It gives you this very false sense of like self-importance, and really makes you feel like you're doing something absolutely amazing. And, you know, it can go to your head very quickly if you're not.
Gets to you.
Huh?
The narcissism can get to you.
Absolutely, right? So it's a very dangerous tool to be on the mic like that. And so his advice is always like, whatever your microphone time is, there needs to be like a multiple of 10 in private. Like whatever your public worship is, there needs to be like a multiple of 10 in private worship. And I think that's kind of analogous to the idea of, you know, Islamic content creation is, we shouldn't be rushing to just post anything and everything that we think of. I think one of the traps in, like, the pressure is one of the things that happens because of that pressure is we post things before they're ready. Like, either our thoughts are not refined enough, they haven't gone through like a proper shura process, and we're in a rush to just put something out there and, you know, keep our brand going, or our traffic going, or the site going, or, you know, make it get picked up by the algorithms and all of that. And I think that we have to almost just, as inefficient as it is, and as much as it goes against all of the good social media practices, embrace a little bit of, we're going to be unoptimized and we're going to be inefficient. And the trade-off of that is that when we finally do produce content, we can put our name on it and say that this is good quality, that it's useful, that it provides some type of benefit or value. as opposed to this popped in my head, so I threw it up. But in terms of deriving self-worth, I think that is challenging because the validation machine online is so like, it's like crack. To post something and all of a sudden everyone's like liking it or retweeting it. Like, I don't care what anybody says. It's hard not to check that and see what kind of traction it's getting or what kind of views it's getting or any of that stuff, right? It's really impossible not to look at that stuff. And so I think we have to find ways of balance, like proactively balancing that of, when I do post something, how am I complementing it with something that's not happening on the internet?
This Ramadan, I was very active online. I actually, in 30 days, did 99 broadcasts between like masjid stuff, between relief organizations or whatever, right? Because usually in Ramadan, I lead Taraweeh and just do stuff in my local masjid, but the masajid were closed. So there is an expectation to keep people engaged. But I think I basically had a crash because after Ramadan was done, I think I stayed on social media for 1 month, and I've been off of Instagram since August. And the calm that I have, like to not check my likes, to not check my messages, has just been out of this world. And I'm just like, there's something wrong. If this is the culture that like is expected, it's going to destroy our in-life social culture that exists, because we're just going to have those weird expectations of people. But I think you make a very good point. It's just like, we're chasing after a dopamine rush at the end of the day. And, the plug for, if you haven't seen it, The Social Dilemma on Netflix, it's that idea, which is that social media is re-engineering our minds to such a degree to where we feel dependent upon checking our phone. Like, these things are designed so that we constantly pick them up, right? Look at that. I pick it up and it turns on. I don't even press a button anymore. And I think that the challenge that we're in is, as I mentioned before, the gravitas of, number one, being productive within our communities. Number two, finding that fulfillment. And then number three is not losing sight of what matters. What matters is social interaction. What matters is my family. What matters are my friends. What matters are my human relationships. What matters is being able to pick up the phone. And if you have an argument with someone on the internet, don't have a public, like, don't have it out with them in public. Talk to them in private. But I feel like a lot of what we're saying to some degree may fall on dead ears, because a lot of folks aren't going to listen to that. Like, what we're speaking about is not sexy, right?
Yeah.
That it's not the easiest way to get likes.
It's tough. I remember I was at a convention and I was speaking to a comedian who's his same age as me, and I actually met him when I was on tour, and he was like coming up and he was trying to like get started with this whole thing. And then I met him like 2 years later, where I'm kind of just like not as active on anything. I'm just like here and there, and he's like very active, and he's like blowing up online and everything. And so I was just talking to him. I was just like, yeah, like I'm just trying to figure out how I want to navigate social media. He was just like, man, you just have to post every day, like multiple times a day. Just post, keep posting. I'll just like, and he was like, so like this is a rule, you have to do it. And I'm just like, post what? I'm like, what am I gonna even post? And it's crazy because now on TikTok, people are actually asking that question, and there's certain people on TikTok who answer, and they were just like, just share random things throughout your day, share what you're eating for breakfast, share random thoughts. And I'm just like, wow, like the amount, how dangerous is it to constantly think in the most mundane aspects of your life, to think I should share this with the rest of the world. And also, while doing that, I can't completely be genuine, because every time you're posting, every time you're in front of that camera, even the shape of your face, your expressions will change. You're not being yourself. And so, how dangerous does that become over time? Even for me now, I am still trying to figure out how to navigate social media. As a singer-songwriter, it's like you're expected to just always have something, and I'm just like, I don't want to. And then as soon as you say I don't want to, you're like a weirdo. It's like, how are you not doing this? So I'm sure Nihal felt the same thing, and just like constantly posting. And then that's why I think you got rid of it right now. It's just like just a peace of mind of not being
like I wake up and I'm calmer, man. Like it's not the
Yeah.
first thing I'm checking. It's not the last thing
Yeah.
that I'm looking at when I'm going to sleep. Omar, I have a question. When you wrote Fiqh of Social Media, TikTok didn't exist, right?
It did.
Or did it?
Yeah.
I'm
And when
sorry,
I started, it didn't. But I mean, when
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
when I was writing the book, it's
like one thing I keep getting told by people, yo, you got to get on TikTok, and I'm like, why do I need to get on
TikTok
TikTok?
is crazy. It's
No, they're
just,
like, yeah, it's like, you know, we need to be there to teach our youth Islam. I was like, yo, it's like if we have to just utilize literally elevator pitches to teach the most valuable aspects of our ethics system and our religious system, like we've lost. I'm sorry. Like
Islamic Muslim TikTok is the worst. Like
I don't have TikTok,
it's
by the way,
just-
so I have no idea.
I'm on TikTok and oh my God, it's like,
Are you on TikTok, Omar?
it's what got me through the pandemic. Like that was my entertainment. You know,
And there's this new thing called Clubhouse that everyone keeps sending me an invite for. I know nothing about it.
I got on Clubhouse to see what it was about. It's Pal Talk for it's the Gen Z version of Pal Talk.
Oh, I haven't heard
yeah.
Talk in like 15 years.
Yeah.
but the TikTok thing is crazy because first of all, you'll be scrolling through, and this has happened to me at least like 24 times, right? Like someone says something so matter-of-factly. Like there's this one woman who was talking about the origin of the word mosque and how the queen used to call Muslims mosquitoes, and then the term mosque came about. And I'm watching it, and there's like thousands and thousands of likes on this thing, and I'm just like, this doesn't seem accurate. And I go, and the first comments is like, this is complete nonsense, right? So it's the amount of misinformation.
Yeah.
And that's not even like Muslims. If we're going talking about the Muslims, they'll say the most absurd things, and it's just a bunch of people either validating it. It's the entire thing of like, you know, personal truth versus, you know, absolute truths. Everyone has their personal truths based off of emotion, and everyone's validating each other in that sense. And it becomes very like numbing to the point. And I actually talk about, I mentioned this, I think at a recent program or something, where with TikTok, the whole thing is based off like, you know, how it works, like the duets and like, you know, you lip sync and you do the dances.
Yeah.
Everything is like a joke, right? So it comes to this idea, like when I was growing up, there was this hadith that was like, the prophet said that, you know, excessive laughter deadens the heart. And I used to think to myself, like, that doesn't seem like a, you know, great way to look at life. Like, shouldn't we always be happy and everything? And then now I'm realizing that everything has become a joke. And when that happens, you actually can't access spirituality. You can't access seriousness. You can't even reflect seriously, because you start taking everything. Even young Muslims now are looking at religion and spirituality and life and being like, yeah, like we're here and then we're going to die. Let's make fun of everything. Even the most sacred things, you know, there was a whole trend on TikTok of like people having conversations with God and the things that God would say and stuff like that. We don't realize how offensive that stuff is, but it's all a joke. And I mean, that's my comment on TikTok. I mean, this can go on for a while, but yeah.
No, I agree completely. Like I've during the height of the well, I'm still in the height of the pandemic, but it was like my entertainment source for a while. But now I don't go on as much. Like maybe every few days I'll just kind of see what the latest memes are, so to speak. But yeah, you're like the misinformation just, it hit me like it was like a gut punch. Like how many Muslims were just on there just very matter-of-factly saying things, and not even on like simple issues. Like they're up there giving like detailed fatwas on Islamic finance, and I'm just like, I know you're wrong, but you know, it's going to take me more than a 45-second like song and dance to tell you why. You know, like it there. And then, you know, the other thing is, like you mentioned, the reflection and spirituality part. It's when people are engaging on those platforms, right? So like I had a conversation with one of the youth. I had a conversation with one of the youth about TikTok. And I said, look, yeah, the discussion was, well, isn't it better to be on there and give Islamic reminders so we can reach people that are on there? And I said, sure, but do you want to be known as the TikTok guy? Like, is that what you want your Islamic reputation to boil down to? Is that you're the dude who made Muslim memes on TikTok for dawah. I was like, okay, it might be beneficial, but you're never going to be able to outgrow that. You're going to, that stereotype is going to follow you around. Now, that doesn't mean that someone can't do it. Like, I think Imam Suhaib Webb is on there. He does a good job. He does a great job of engaging on newer platforms as an early adopter, right? But that's very much the exception. Very much the exception. I think most people can't do that. But, everything being a joke is so true. And the thing that pains me the most is when I see and they're clearly like practicing Muslim families, like the mom is wearing hijab and this and that. And the kids are just pranking their parents. Like, oh, I got a tattoo. Haha. No, I didn't. Or like making my dad think I'm drinking alcohol and the dad freaks out. And then they like post it up, for likes. And it's like, that's when the hadith of, lying to, or what's the hadith about like,
like when you even tell jokes, you shouldn't lie. You're not.
Not only that, but like, doing some type of falsehood just to get a laugh.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like it is way beyond normal bounds of like decency, like the way that they're pranking their parents and doing things. And for what? Like just to get, 10,000 likes versus 5,000 likes or what? I don't know. Like there's no end game. It's just they keep continuing that machine.
Yeah. And I think there's this, my sister actually brought up this point the other day. She was like, in today's world, when you have things like TikTok and you have all these like, young people from all around the world of different experiences connecting and stuff, and not really like a sense of community where you're, what's really important is like, accountability. Like for example, the village dynamic, how being responsible to not just your parents, but being responsible to like your friends' grandparents, right? Like treating them as elders of the community and not just like the nuclear family and saying, oh, like my parents are the only people who have the right to tell me anything. Right. And, one of the important things about that is that we learn certain things, rites of passage or, coming of age. There's so many things that we're supposed to be learning that it's difficult to communicate with young people on these platforms. So for example, my sister was saying, do you remember how like, there's no way today you can teach a young person the adab of like giving someone water, which my grandmother was like very particular. When you give someone water, you hold it like this and you are being respectful for it. And you never say no to someone asking you for water, because that's like a basic human necessity. If your little sibling says, even if it's your like little kid, right, who says, can you get me some water? You should never deny them, go get them water, right? So these kind of things of like adab and just etiquette, it's like, how is that even being communicated? Because I've seen young people not having like that at all. And yeah,
so that reminds me, like, growing up, there was that more community feel, right? Like you grew up with your friends, and then there was literally like other training how to interact with your friends' parents. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to my friend's house to play video games, how do I act? How do I talk to their parents? How am I representing my family, so to speak, right? Like, don't go over there and start cussing while you're playing games or doing, like there's very strict, like, this is how you act. And there's a sense of accountability too. Like you can't just go act, if I go to school and completely act up, word is going to get back to my parents. Right? Someone's going to tell someone who's going to tell their parents, who's going to tell the other uncle and auntie, and it's going to come back and the mom and dad will be like, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? Mm-hmm. And then now it's like, you just do all that online and there's no accountability. There's no limits. And not only that, but see, when it's the community, you don't get to choose who it is. Right, you're forced to deal with them for better or for worse. Right. The people that live near you, your friend, your parents' social circle, like you're stuck whether you like them or not. But now you curate who that community is, and so not only can I completely act out however I want, but if someone dare come and try to hold me accountable, I just cut them out. Yeah. And I only have the friends that are going to keep liking and commenting and validating what I'm doing.
Yeah. So we're basically out of time, but Omar, if people want to get in touch with you or see what you're up to, how can they get in touch with you, inshallah?
ibnabiomar.com. If they go to ibnabiomar.com/newsletter, they can get on the email list. And that's pretty much anything that I'm doing. I update it there. So podcasts, YouTube, book, writing, all that stuff. That's the central location.
your podcast, what's that called?
It's also Ibn Abi Omar.
Ibn Abi Umar. They find it on Apple Podcasts?
Yes, you can.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well,
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a great episode.
No, I enjoyed it, and Jazakallah khair for having me on.
Yeah, but all right, everyone. This is Faith in Fine Print with your hosts Nihal Khan and
Alman Nusrat.
Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Okay.